Today's podcast is brought to you by Kentucky Farm Bureau Insurance. Accidents happen. Without the right coverage from the right insurance company, damage to your automobile can be a real financial hit. That's why Kentuckians appreciate the competitive rates and personal service they get from Kentucky Farm Bureau Insurance. When the unexpected happens, count on us to help you get back on the road. To request a free quote, find your local KFB insurance agent at mykfbagent.com. Kentucky Farm Bureau, big on commitment. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going well. We are busy over here in the video area, getting ready for some things coming up. So
yeah, we don't do this often, but I'm curious because normally it's tough to be like, what are you doing daily right now? Because it's whatever. It's 100 different things every day. But this time of year, you're kind of consistent. Like, what's the video crew doing right now?
Yeah, so essentially every September since I've worked here, which is nearly 20 years.
Old.
I'm old, yeah. Is we are producing videos for the annual meeting. When I first started, we just did a couple features on the Young Farm Family Contest.
Okay.
It was pretty much the video, and then we produced a video, Executive Vice President report every year. Mm-hmm. So we did that for years, but as time has gone, we've actually do a lot more. We create videos related to the theme. We create other features about other contests, like the Farmer of the Year contest.
Yeah, this is your fault because you guys did a good job, and then the other contests were like, "Hey,
someone asked me to do
those Young Farm Family videos are so nice."
Somebody really just told me I had to do it,
and I said, "You know what would be nice for our Farmer of the Year?" Matt, you got time, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, all kinds. No, but yeah, really, September, October, we're producing videos that you'll see at the annual meeting, which then turns into social media videos. So at farms, we've been in a couple already, and we go there and we shoot them. We go early, really early.
What's the vibe? I'm thinking of. I've never had my video taken on my farm. Mm-hmm. I don't exactly do the contest.
We'll be out there soon.
Come on out. No, how is the vibe when you're getting out there with the farmers? I mean, this is a busy time of year. I mean, they're cranking it out. They're happy you're there because they are happy they're in this contest, and this is a very cool moment. Yeah. It's a keepsake. But what's the vibe when you get there first thing in the morning? Like, how does that kind of go?
Yeah, so, first in the morning, you go early because the light's nice. It's a good sunrise. So we want to show off the farms really, really early. Typically, farmers are already up, so they're like, yeah, cool, whatever,
They're on their third cup of coffee, you're on your first.
It's weird because you want the production happening. The problem is you kind of can't have them do it because they've got to be in the shoot. They got to run around. There's moments where we have them do it themselves, But I just really give it I make sure they understand the expectations and kind of what we're looking to do while we're there so that they can be ready for it. A lot of times, some folks have their spouse living off the farm, they work off the farm, they got to be off that day, or a kid. A lot of people like show off their family, so they got school right now. So a lot of that's just pre-work, just making sure they understand kind of what we're looking to do. And then, they take a big break and hang out with us for a day. Essentially, I mean, it's a disruption, but we try to be as efficient as possible. A lot of the things that we use them the most for is before really the farming gets going. We're kind of done with the interview and done with some of that. So it works to our advantage that we go so early. But yeah, we want to see them farm. That's what's kind of cool. When we first we're doing these when I first started, it was just a lot of like pretty shots and an interview. And I was like, let's get gritty. Let's show these folks, not really doing the job, So that's been, I think, a big benefit. And also showing their families not in such a canned way, like a real natural, real way. We've had kids like brushing their teeth, getting ready to go to school in these videos and these kind of things. So like just brushing their hair, getting ready for the day, having breakfast, those kind of things I think really have added a lot. Sometimes the kids can actually go to school. I mean, because we're there so early, they may miss the very beginning of school. We try to get a lot of that stuff out of the way. Sometimes spouses do need to go to work, depending on what it is. So we again, a lot that early morning actually is our advantage a lot of times on these. But that's what we're doing right now. We always create some content that's related to the theme that we're kind of trying to express at the meeting. And it's really the theme for the year. It's from annual meeting to annual meeting. So we're trying to make some really nice stuff that kind of speaks to that. So that's what we're doing. We're very busy. I drive our video guys crazy because we try to continue to make the consistent stuff that we make every every month. Also making annual meeting at the same time. So it's a busy time for us. It's a stressful time, but it's kind of, some stuff that we're accustomed to doing and kind of like doing. So, it's not, it's stressful and tough, but we get it all done every year. It feels like we're not going to it. It's probably like 2 weeks before annual meeting around Thanksgiving. We're pretty sure we're not going to get everything done, and then we do every year. Every year, we're like, this is not going to happen.
Yeah, so if this podcast is ever like not doing well and we're like, you want us to be the last episode, we'll tell you the real feelings right ahead of annual meeting, because the roller coaster of emotions we all go through, no matter the division, if you're on the 4th floor right before annual meeting, pretty good chance you've almost had a mental breakdown thinking you're going to miss a deadline. You hit it anyway. People that have been here longer give you a pep talk, and then you're like, they're wrong. They don't understand. I tried something new. It all works. And then we get there. It's a family reunion. We love all our people. So, one day we'll just do the behind the scenes before annual meeting.
Yeah, I think annual meeting, but it from the outside looking in, you're probably like, well, they're just kind of doing the same thing every year. But the people that we work with, the vendors and different things, those people change a lot, and they've never done it before, or the hotel staff's different, or the whatever. So there's like stuff that seems like it's just the same every year. Our staff might be the same people, but they have to work with those folks to make sure that it is the same every year in some way. Some stuff needs to stay kind of traditional and stuff, and some stuff is still different. That's what's cool about what we do. We get to be the different every year.
Yeah.
Which is, again, stressful to try to think of new, different things, but it's also kind of fun, because it's a new theme, new idea, new people, new stories. That's kind of fun. So.
Yeah, and so I think, to me, this time of year is like the epitome of what you do, the epitome of what you do for the Federation side, now that you guys are housed on the insurance group. Is really a lot of the annual meeting content, which is, it's funny we're talking about that, because in my situation, this is really the epitome of what we do from a advisory committee perspective, is with the commodity division. I mean, we're working throughout the year, but if you have seen any of my crew in September, we have probably been at an advisory committee, or you have crossed us on the road and we waved, because that's really all we do. So we're at the tail end of all of these. Kyle's group obviously is the true functioner of this with public affairs and actually taking in those resolutions and doing that final review. But when it comes to the actual advisory committees, my guys house, I think we have 16 of the 22. So, I mean, we take the legwork of these front-end meetings, which is great. We love it. It's really fun, but it is a lot of travel. We've been all over the place, and we've heard the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it has been, it's been a busy month, but a good month. And so it's funny, this week we start to breathe, actually. October for us, the guys are in the field. Cabin for fall cabin's almost done for most guys, and we kind of get a chance to breathe. So, y'all crank it up. We get a chance to breathe. Yeah, it's all great. It's all balanced.
It's all great. Yeah. Thanksgiving's always a nice, like, a couple days, but it's like it's like always about a week or so before our annual meeting. So it's like, I'll breathe and I'll eat for a day. Really, really good. But really, like, as the annual meeting kind of comes to a close, that's where we breathe a little bit and can take a pause and have a good Christmas and those kind of things. So, but speaking of commodities, we have someone coming in today that can speak to a handful of those pretty well.
Pretty good handful.
Was that a good?
That was pretty good. My man Chad Lee is here. Dr. Lee. My favorite doctors are the ones that don't have a need for me to call them a doctor. He's one of those.
Right.
We love Chad. Chad is we'll just say it. It's probably Tim's friend more than he is ours sometimes.
Yeah.
Tim uses him a lot, and that he is regularly referenced in our articles and things to do with crop updates. But we pulled him in today to talk about Chad. We kind of wanted to hear where he's from, what he does, and how he got here.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be in the podcast a lot, doing a little more what Chad's researching, probably with interviews with Tim. But today was just about getting to know him, and maybe it's just a reintroduction to people that already do know him. But we learned a lot about his background and stuff like that. So, yeah, a really good interview, and I think folks would like it.
So without further ado, I'm Renee Carrico.
And I'm Matt Hilton.
Let's get rural.
We'll do a lot of that, but we're also going to get in the weeds a little bit about some stuff as well. So
okay. Well, hopefully we stay out of the weeds. Weeds hurt the yield, right? So.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, actually, my background is weed science, so I spend a lot of time in that space.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I did two. Well, talk about it later. I did 2 summers as an intern with a company at the time, American Cyanamid, which was eventually bought by BASF and then going from there. But at the time, they had 75% of the soybean herbicide market
Oh, geez.
with Pursuit, Scepter, and a few other Raptor and a few other chemistries. And I worked for them for 2 summers up in Ohio, and that's probably where I decided I liked the ag research side of it. And I was curious about it. I did a summer internship in sales for 1 year. My boss is like, look, the sales folks make the real money, so go over there and try that out for a summer. That was actually on the animal science side. It was the company that makes Safeguard cattle dewormer.
Yeah.
So I worked here in Kentucky for a summer on that project, but decided I was much better at science than I was at sales. But I mean, my boss had a PhD, and my grad school search was, well, where should I go? And so she gave me 3 different schools to look at, and one of them was Nebraska. That was the furthest away from home, and totally different environment than what I was used to with irrigated agriculture. And I think at the time, cattle was number 1 and corn was number 2, and they were treated that way in the state. And so, during harvest, even Lincoln would kind of shut down in terms of they knew to make way for the trucks coming in to haul grain and such. And so it's a very different perspective. So it was phenomenal. Yeah. And while I was at Nebraska, actually, when I was doing my internships, there's a brand new product in development called Roundup Ready soybean. And we had some joint studies with Monsanto on those. And I remember getting back in the truck and telling my boss, I was like, well, the stuff we've got with Roundup looks pretty good. And she said, yes, but Roundup alone looks pretty good too. She says, we're in trouble. And so you fast forward, as I'm in grad school in Nebraska and Roundup finally hits the market and you see the immediate disruption in the market at that point, I thought, well, it's going to be a little bit harder to just be a weed scientist working for one of these companies. That was my goal.
No kidding.
I want her job someday, so that's what I want to do. And so I started looking around, and I ended up doing a sort of weed science plant pathology project at Michigan State, looking at whether or not the Roundup gene was causing soybeans to be more susceptible to a specific disease, that the defense mechanisms were in the same pathway that Roundup would disrupt. And so there were some reports early on of more disease issues in the Roundup soybeans. And so we spent 4 years trying to study that out and figure that out, and basically determined there was no effect of the Roundup gene or the Roundup herbicide affecting that pathway in terms of defense mechanisms. The difference is now you had nice big leaves and a better microclimate for disease to develop in.
Gotcha.
So because of chemistries you used prior to that, some of those chemistries were called burners. And we still have them.
Burning them up a little.
Right, right. They caused some damage to the leaves. And one of those chemistries in particular actually elevated a defense compound as well. So not only was it basically creating a more open climate for air to get through, but it also was elevating a defense mechanism, which at some point they actually labeled, put it on the herbicide label that if you apply this at a specific timing, you could actually suppress disease with it as well. So anyhow, that was my background in those two.
Okay, so
About
everybody,
to do this thing.
Yeah.
Chad Lee's here in studio. He's smarter than me, as you just heard. But yeah, I gathered most of what he was talking about. And so we appreciate you being here. Really an interesting path to where you are today. Keep telling us more about kind of, that's where you started. How'd you get to UK?
Yeah, so just to recap, when I got started, I took 2 internships, and I would encourage everyone in college to take internships in the area they're interested in studying. Whatever that is, go do it. Come work for me if you think you like agronomy. Work for the weed science folks if you think you like that. But go get an internship and work in that space. And that was the difference maker for me. So grad school to me was purely vocational. It was simply my boss had a PhD. I wanted to do her job someday in industry. And so where do I go to get the training to do that job? That was strictly it. But while I was at Michigan State, my advisors in Nebraska both were majority extension appointments, and I did some work with them. And then when I was at Michigan State for 2 years of the project, While I was there for 4 total, I worked as a non-tenured track faculty person covering weed control in soybeans and potatoes. And it was research extension, and so I would do that job basically until 5 or 5:30, and then go get something to eat and come back and be in the office till about midnight working on the PhD stuff. And we were 2 years into it at that point. I had a couple of undergrads helping me out, and so that also made it work. But working in on the extension side, I really liked the non-biased approach that we could take to everything. I'll go back to my boss. My boss was working for a specific company. She was testing products for that company, but she also tested products for a lot of other companies as comparisons and checks. And what I noticed was farmers would see her in the store somewhere if we're stopping by somewhere, or just in a restaurant, and they'd ask her a question. And she'd tell them exactly what she thought would work best for their situation, regardless of which product was being sold. She's like, I'm not in sales. And she said, in my line of work, my integrity is the final marketing piece that I have, regardless of who I work for. Mm-hmm. And I can't lose that. So I just tell them what I think works the best. And I like that. That stuck with me. And so you fast forward to looking for careers when I got out, and I decided really at Michigan. I started thinking about it a little bit at Nebraska. I had an uncle that was an ag agent up in Ohio. I had another uncle that worked at a bull test station for Ohio State, and they tested all kinds of cattle and did that aspect of it. And so I that was on the back of my mind, but certainly when I was at Michigan State, it firmed up that that's what I wanted to do when it was all said and done. And I figured I'd end up in weed science somewhere at a university. And I actually had the option. I had a choice between Kentucky and one other university. The position at the other university was in weed science. Kentucky was in agronomy. And I think what I really enjoyed was when I interviewed here, majority of the work is extension, part of it's research, and that emphasis was really stressed that if you're here, you're going to be working with farmers and county agents and crop consultants. You're going to be spending a lot of time traveling the state and working on very applied things. And if you don't, then you won't be successful. And the other place I visited told me it was a very similar extension research appointment. And they said, well, those first 5 years, you need to flip that, do mostly research, a little bit of extension, get through the tenure process, and then you can worry about extension. But with my background, I'd already called some farmers in that state and asked them, what are the key things you're looking for in this position? And like, we've been without somebody for a couple of years. We need this, this, and this. We really need this over here. And so from my perspective, I thought it was a clearer-cut decision to come here. And it was a great decision. Really glad I did. It's been a phenomenal state to work in. The farmers here really understand their challenges and limitations. They're willing to talk to you about it one-on-one, sometimes in a group, depending upon what it is. But I think the self-awareness of what it takes to grow a crop is really high here. And so we have really, really intelligent farmers, self-aware farmers. And we also have a lot of farmers that think beyond their own operation, thinking longer term on some things. And so all of that has been phenomenally rewarding for me.
So I want to back up because I think you've gotten to the point in your career in Kentucky, people think of you as a Kentuckian, which is awesome. And
yeah.
But it's funny. My mom works with you very regularly with her job in Princeton, and so there's times where I'll say, "Oh yeah, I got to call Chad," and she's like, "Well, I just talked to him. He's back in Ohio with the family." So talk through how you were raised and what's still going on back home, because I think a lot of people, where in Ohio, I mean, Ohio is a little similar to Kentucky in the sense that you travel one direction to the other. The terrain changes, the type of operations change. So talk to us about kind of the upbringing in Ohio.
Sure, absolutely. So I did grow up on a smaller farm, just a couple of 100 acres, about an hour south of Columbus. And so we're literally right at the edge of glacial till. And so our farm is where a glacier melted at one point. So it's not the deep black soils that you see when you go a little further north, a little further west in the state. It's a little more of a mix. But literally just south of us, you get into hills immediately. And just north of us, about 10 miles, it really starts to flatten out and level out, and it looks like that deep, productive soil that you see if you're traveling from Cincinnati to Columbus.
Okay.
Right? We're not in that spot. So we grew corn and soybean. We had hogs growing up. Everybody had hogs growing up. I've told Warren Beeler more than once that, I was a child during the 80s and hogs saved our bacon, literally,
Right. Literally.
in the farming operation.
Yeah.
And so I went through that. I went through that stress and saw what mom and dad were dealing with. We had farmers in the area that lost their farms over, some were third, fourth generation farmers that got sideways on or underwater on mortgages and operating loans and everything else. So they had just come out of the 70s where it was roaring. Everything you did just turned to gold. And then right about 78, it all started to come back the other direction. In the mid-'80s, it took about a decade for farmers to get through that and get around it. You could sort of make some parallels to what we've seen a couple of times here in the last 10 years that sort of look like that. We could be in one of those again right now. We're not at those levels. Those, they had operating interest of 18%. Their mortgages went to 18%.
Yikes.
And then there were farms that couldn't even pay the interest. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, but that sort of resonated. So I went to college. It was, I'm going to do something in engineering. I'm going to do something away from the farm.
Get out of here.
We hear this a lot. I was going to do something else, but just
why
brought us back.
Why are you killing yourself for, why are you working all these hours to try to make a go of it when all these things are conspiring against you in that side of it? So anyhow, so that's what I wanted to do, but I was looking for some summer jobs and I was always interested in agronomy. And so, I had the opportunity to do that job and switch my major and went from there.
See, and I didn't even know the Bull Test Center, so you were that close. The right influence in the family, you could have been an animal science guy.
Could have been.
Sounds very doubtful.
I have. So I've got my cousins who all farm. Most of my cousins are teachers during the day, and then one's a pipe fitter. But then they farm afternoons and weekends. They've all got cattle. I've got another cousin that has some cattle and row crops. Actually, he manages the beef and sheep herds at Ohio State. So he manages those research herds up there still. Cousin on the other side of the family even. So not even the same side of the family. But certainly have some connections that way. And mom and dad had off-farm jobs too. So they were, and dad still farms now. And so back to your mom's comment about being in Ohio, that's really been a post-COVID thing. I was up there 3 years ago, I think, helping harvest corn and had to step back and realize I think it's the first time I've been back home to harvest corn since I've been here.
Wow.
And it's because we're doing field research, right? And so we've got corn to plant and soybeans to plant and corn to harvest, soybeans to harvest, and wheat to plant. And it all falls right there in those same time frames as to what it does for them typically. And so it was just a matter of finally saying, I'm going to get back up there and get a little bit involved from time to time with it. So, yeah.
Well, and that's got to be enjoyable. I think that's, and I've probably said this before, but I'm sure we're getting new listeners with our new rebrand.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We're in the hundreds, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
But we talk about that a lot. I think the specialists, the researchers, whatever it might be that do have that extension connection, farmers can feel if you've done it. And I'm not saying that you have to have done it to be a researcher and to be a PhD, but the willingness to get in a tractor, the willingness to, even if it's just riding with them or taking a bag of seed and putting it in the hopper. I mean, there's just pieces of that. They can feel that, and it brings that comfort back. And so I'm sure for you, who was born and raised doing it and had been doing it on plots, just something about being in the normal scale of equipment and everything all over again and sitting right beside your dad or being, him in the cart, whatever. I'm sure that brings a different, kind of re-energizes maybe how you grew up and brings that back, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it does help me relate to growers overall. And then I've spent a lot of time with growers in various capacities. And, my main area is agronomy. It's how do I improve corn, soybean, wheat production, yields, quality, those aspects of it. But the reality is for a farmer, any one of our farmers, agronomy is just one piece of their bigger puzzle that they've got to work with and deal with. It's very fortunate. I helped organize and coordinate a peer group of farmers that went from Kentucky to Minnesota. Fairly large operations. We would meet monthly online, and then try to meet in person twice a year at a different farm. And spend a lot of time just comparing notes and learning about what struggles they deal with and things like that. Got to a really, really good point. And when the Grain and Forage Center started to really ramp up, I had to step away from that. But that group's still running, and I still talk to those farmers. But it was eye-opening to me of the conversations of what you would step back and from the outside look at and say, these are very successful operations. They've got it all figured out, right? And I think the reality is they don't. They understand that they don't. And what I found with those operations, one, they're willing to constantly learn. They're constantly looking for experts in various areas to help them learn and find deficiencies. But their conversations are much broader than just agronomy. And I'm not going to be an expert in those other areas. I don't want to be an expert in those other areas, but I think at least understanding that as an agronomist helps with that perspective as well. So that if we're making a recommendation on what to do in corn, we recognize there's other issues a farmer may have to deal with too.
Right.
Yeah, one of my favorite statements is when people say, when I was selling seed, I was their cotton person. And then I would have to always remind myself, although cotton was my number one, and at the time, the price, cotton was their number one crop. And that's very similar to corn in Kentucky a lot of times. Mm-hmm. That might be the first acres they do a pick on, depending on price. They're going to pick, okay, we're going to do corn acres first. But they have soybeans, they have wheat, they have canola now. I mean, so you are not their end all be all, and that's kind of a wake up call sometimes to be like, ooh, this is a broader conversation. And so if I'm there talking about just one piece of the whole operation, I better be adding some value, and then I better know when the door's open, I need to get out of it and let them do the rest of their stuff. So I think that's big. I think it's, and the bigger operations normally have the whole mix. So you got to be able to know who to bring in to help them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it helps even with if it's a specific field question. So there was a grower a couple of years ago that had something specific on corn he had a question about. And I said, well, you need to get out there in the next 2 days and get this taken care of. And he says, I can't. I'm cutting alfalfa. And I've got a client that I'm selling my alfalfa to, and I'm only one bad load of hay away from losing the contract. I've had it for years, but one bad load and it's all gone. So when the hay's ready, I've got to go get it. I said, well, in that case, this is your second best option on corn that you can do a week from now. Here's the hit you're going to take on yield, and here's some other things you can think about it. So I think that's really important for us to have some of that perspective of what a farmer's got to deal with on a day-to-day basis. The logistics is probably where we, on the university side, because we're doing a lot of small plot work and the way we do things and our things that come at us, it's a different set of logistics than what a farmer deals with. It's probably one area of perspective where we tend to lose from time to time. Never forget, farmer says, well, the plant pathologist tells me this is my top priority. The weed scientist says this is it. The soils guy says this is it. And which one is it? Where do I get started in the operation? And hopefully, as an agronomist, we do a pretty decent job of putting some of those things together.
Yeah. When you guys talk research, what does that mean? What are you guys doing at the research center, and how does that work? And you said you're trying to make better yield, but what does that actually mean? What are some of those different things you guys do on a regular?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have the research farms, Spindletop, Woodford County Farm, the one in Princeton, and then I also work on farms with farmers as well. And so our research oftentimes, right now, spend a lot of time looking at cover crops, mixing that in with a corn crop, and looking at how do we prevent soil erosion, but how do we also maximize corn yields with it? And then we're looking at the numerous products that come at us every year. We look at a subset of those to see if any of those have some validity to them and how they actually perform, if they behave the way that a company says they're going to behave. We do some other studies where we're looking at some longer-term rotations and trying to get a sense of if we put this product on this year, what does that look like 2 years from now in that field? And so we're doing some things along those lines. We've got a study on soybean looking at some potassium issues. That one's across multiple states with other colleagues. And that one's as much about if we get into a situation where the field is low on potassium, can we do some in-season treatments that will be economical to make a difference? It's one of those we think we know some answers to it, but because we're testing it over about 18 different states, We should have a decent data set at the end of it to get a good idea about what environments it works in. There, certain things work in and other things don't. We're doing a study in wheat right now that basically goes back to farmer observation, where the farmers, in looking at some really high yields, have got some really high head density counts. That means a lot of heads per square foot, per square yard. It's higher than our old recommendation said we needed to be at. And so we're reevaluating that to see if there's been a fundamental change in terms of how many heads per area you need to maximize yield. And then we're overlaying that with some drone imagery, and we're hoping at the end of it that we can use a drone to do the head counts for us. We're a step or two away from that, but we've got some folks, and we're working with folks internally, other colleagues within the university that have some ideas about machine learning, have some ideas about AI, that we can use some of those aspects of it. And I'm just one person, so I've got colleagues. We've got a colleague that works with one study that's had compared no-till to tillage for over 50 years now. It's looking more at long-term trends in the soil and things of that. It's got some other rotation studies. She's doing some landscape work with cover crops on different landscapes and how much nitrogen would a legume provide at those various landscapes. So I'm sort of rambling a little bit.
No.
I mentioned weed science. I mentioned plant pathology. They're looking at various herbicide mixes to control weeds, or they're looking at new fungicides and disease control, looking at some biological options from time to time as well. And so it runs the whole gamut of production.
So I used to get this question a lot, and I know the answer, but I want you to kind of explain it. I used to get this question when I was in the field, and they'd say, the farmers understand it, but people that are not in the farming world maybe don't. Why, if, let's use Bayer. Bayer has come out with some new technologies. Why does the University of Kentucky need to do that research if it's already been done in Georgia and it's already been done in Nebraska? Aren't we just using a bunch of universities' money to do the same research? So explain to maybe someone that doesn't farm, why is that important for whether that's a herbicide that we're spraying across to kill some weeds, or whether that's a variety of corn? Why do we need to do that in all these different parts of the country? What's the use of spending so much money to do that?
It's a great question, and we're using a little bit of university money, a lot of either industry money or money coming from like corn growers and small grain growers, soybean board, farmer organizations, some of it from federal, at least used to be some of it from federal. And so it's that combination of support that comes in that way. And the biggest reason is even in Kentucky, we've got different fields, different environments, different climates that we're working with. If you compare Fulton County down in the bottoms, where you're looking up at the Mississippi River, that's a very different environment than anything else in the state. I mean, it's different than it is 15 miles away in the eastern part of Fulton County. But if you look at, in general, that part of the state, the purchase area, they're a month ahead of where we are here climatically. They can plant a month earlier. They can harvest a month earlier. It's a dramatic change in environment from that region to this region. You also have got some massive differences in soils. We've got fragipan soils where we have some real water limitations and restrictions because of where the fragipan is based. Then you have other soils like some Criders and Pembrokes and Amaris that are deeper, more productive, and more typical, where we see a lot of wheat grown in those environments. And then you get into some river bottoms where it's heavy clay, and that behaves very differently than the other soils I just mentioned. And so you do it here because our climate's a little bit different than the Georgia climate. It's a lot different than a Nebraska climate. And even the states north of us, so Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, once you get out of once you get into that flat land area of those, it's a very different climate than what we deal with here as well. And so what we find if we do these multi-state studies, which we've done from time to time, you might find that one or two things are fairly universal, and you'll find some other things that work very differently in those systems. A massive one for us, if you're down in Georgia again, they're going to do a lot of irrigation, a lot more sunlight. They're planting a month or 2 months before we plant. And if you go north of us, they're actually planting about the same time we do, which is pretty wild to think about. Our planting dates aren't much different than Minnesota's, which is crazy to think about. But if we go dry for 3 weeks, those southern Minnesota soils are going to hold 2 to 3 times as much water as ours do going into that system. So drought stress and some of those things are quite different as well.
I think people always seem surprised. So, I mean, I'm doing, and I don't obviously do row crop. We have pasture, and we're doing cattle, but I'm taking soil samples tonight. That's my job of the day. We're half day Fridays at Farm Bureau, and so my afternoons are always filled with whatever my husband didn't get done the last couple nights when I worked late. And so today is soil testing, and so I'm pulling samples on our pasture ground to see what we're going to do fall fertilizer on, and then a lot of our fertilizer spring. And I think a lot of people just in a county, and I'm Central Kentucky, that's crop ground or that's pasture ground or that's ground that the distilleries might take. You know, that's the conversation for maybe someone that doesn't farm. So hearing things like Amari soil and a Pembroke, those things seem kind of wild to people. But what I try to explain is, you know, we know the cattle we're putting on it are taking things away. We cut hay, we're taking nutrients away. So every year we're going to test to see how much of that it was, and we're going to add back at a reasonable amount to make sure we never have bare ground where things are running off and we're losing our topsoil. We're going to keep a base. Same thing goes for crops. We're putting a crop in, we're removing that crop, we remove nutrients, and so those guys are testing. So I think it's interesting for people that think, oh, it's harvest season and all those guys are doing is jumping in and running the combines and running grain to the elevators. There are so many other tasks happening at the exact same time. And with the cover crops we have in this state that are really cash crops now for a lot of situations, it's a constant, we have a constant crop in the ground. And so I think soil types is very helpful for people to understand. Climate differences are very helpful. And it something about doing research in your own state, on your own farms. I think the on-farm trials are really helpful. It's just different things so people can have some confidence. And you guys as researchers don't pick a brand and don't pick a company. And I think that's helpful for people to hear because it does seem like, well, another state already did this research. What's the big deal? And so I always have thought it's very helpful for people to understand kind of where the money flows from. And then it's a situation of we're an unbiased source and pick what you see on this set of very good data, what you think will work on your soil type. So I think it's helpful for people to understand.
Yeah, and a very specific, example of that is the, some farmers were getting incentives to put out cover crops, and most of that data was coming out of Iowa and Minnesota. And so the guidelines they were using were Iowa, Minnesota guidelines. And so after a few years of us doing some research in that space, we've been able to modify those guidelines for Kentucky and change when we can terminate the crop and have a little better understanding of how it fits in our system here. We have a milder winter than they do. We can plant earlier than they can. That changes how much growth we get in a cover crop and potentially how much competition we have for nitrogen afterwards. So that's a very good example of something that started out as a decent idea and had some good data in a region much further north than us, but doesn't really fit what our farmers deal with and see in this system here. So that's part of why we do it. That's part of why there's a land grant university in every state. It's to help address some of those localized issues in that regard. And I'm glad to hear you're doing the soil test. You'll make the soils folks happy to hear that. But to your point, it's a massive expense to put fertilizer out. It's a cost. It shows up as a cost on the books, and it's harder to see on a cattle operation where that return comes back in, except you can see it in your forage production and some of those aspects. And so you're right. And if you read a lot of popular press or if you're on social media and you're hearing a lot of thoughts and concerns about how farmers grow crops, there's this concept that they're paying zero attention to what they're doing. They're just putting all these things out and destroying everything in the process. And it's some just really wild misconceptions that are out there about this. You mentioned soil types. Back on a lot of our grain farmers, not only do we deal with just different soil types in general, but a given field may have 8 different soil types in it.
Right.
And so farmers are treating those fields in zones, partially by soil type, partially by crop history. They're using yield maps or GPS. They've got auto steer on their vehicles. They've got section control on their sprayers. They've got section control on their planters. They can do variable seeding rate. They can do variable fertilizer rates. Try to be very precise about where they're putting nutrients, where they're putting inputs, and as a result, coming away with something much more efficient. I just had a conversation on the drive up where a farmer was in a room with us not long ago and said that 40 years ago, if you go back 40 years and you come forward, we've more than doubled corn yield, and we've only increased our nitrogen fertilizer by 5%. In that time frame.
That's unreal.
That is a phenomenal efficiency number to talk about, and one that nobody, frankly, outside of agriculture really comprehends or understands. The efficiencies that have been put into the system is just amazing. And so in general, for folks, whether they're in Kentucky or if they're outside the state, most of our growers are in no-till or low tillage systems. Most are in crop rotation. The two biggest rotations in row crops are just the corn 1 year, soybean the next, or corn 1 year, wheat planted in the fall, wheat harvested the next June, and then soybean go in behind that. And then after the soybean crops, that's when we're planting cover crops into the field as well. And so what we're discussing are not unique for the farmers in Kentucky. It's standard operation. We've got fields that have been no-till for 30, 40 years in Kentucky. And this region, Kentucky, part of Tennessee, just north of the Ohio River, still in the Ohio River Valley, that fits this area. This area does that and does it quite well. But most of that started here. Chaser Rabbit had a conversation with a distillery that's owned by a company in Europe. I was talking to the VP of North America, and she said, "Why is the U.S. so far behind in sustainability goals?" And I said, well, through the conversation, I said, do you realize the corn that you buy, because I know which farms are selling to you, they're all in that system I just mentioned, the no-till, the rotation, some cover crops. She had no idea about any of that. She said, well, that's what we're after. And I was like, well, yes.
You're doing good.
They're switching to that now in Scotland and England. These guys have been doing it for 15, 20 years that you're buying from.
Yeah. I would. My question to you is, as a piece of the agri-science world, the community, what can happen to reverse some of these misconceptions? That's what seems. Is it the transparency of it? Is showing it more? Is it, communication people doing maybe a little better job? like what is it that we're missing, that this is kind of overwhelmed into this space where we're now, where there's so many questions about, do we just literally explain what each piece does? How do we get better at reversing this trend?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that sets up for an entirely different podcast in terms of filling in where I think we need to go with some of that. In part, we're a victim of our own success.
Right.
In that most of the population is now removed from the farming operation, which is, you could argue, is a good thing ultimately for them. That means we produce a stable enough food supply, feed and fiber supply, that they can do that they're allowed to move off the operation. And that removal creates some of this confusion that we deal with now. We're seeing more and more, in part in our own programs, we're trying to attract kids in that are not from farm backgrounds to work in our programs as part of that aspect of it as well. And then if you look at where some of the more influential voices that are out there, they're really, really good at putting together very short and sometimes long documentaries, short films, videos. They're really, really good at communication. So I'm going to make a very broad brush statement, and we can leave it at that. But from my opinion, the farmers who are the most productive and efficient at using their resources judiciously are the worst ones to tell you about it.
Right.
And the ones who are really, really good at talking about it, if you visit the operation and see the farm, probably not the best one growing it.
Right.
In fact, they're probably making their money off of what they're selling on the communication side, whether it's a book or it's a podcast or it's YouTube videos. That's where they're making their money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's outliers to that, of course. We've got some phenomenal people that do a great job farming and do a great job communicating. But I will agree with you in the sense that you'll notice when those guys have a lull or those gals have a lull, and you know when it is? Planting and harvest. Because they're busy and they're farming and they're doing things really well. And they got a guy that has a kid in a play. They're going to run the truck for the day. I mean, they have a really good system going. And I think that is what scares some of our I don't even want to say biggest, some of our most efficient, most profitable farmers in the state from jumping into that is they go, well, if I can't do it consistently, like my number one job is this farm and keeping my family and keeping my employees. If I pull this in and I can't do it consistently, why do it?
Right.
Obviously, our argument back from us that do see the public all the time and do get the questions and then send the news reporter to that guy's farm for the 20 minutes he does have, we're like, anything's better than nothing. But you kind of can see where they're coming from because, yeah, if I can't be consistent and the biggest time of year, I need to explain why the heck we're moving equipment at 5 o'clock in the middle of the day in Eminence, Kentucky, when you're all leaving the bank and the grocery store, is when I really don't have time to do a TikTok reel, you know? I mean, so it's hard. It's hard to, but I agree with you wholeheartedly sometimes. So then when they do see something and it doesn't get explained maybe perfectly, we also don't want to be combative within our own industry and say, well, that person really doesn't farm the way a lot of our guys farm. You don't want to say that either. So it's very much a balance of how do we encourage the guys that do a great job and do encourage them that even a little bit's great. And then how do we nicely make sure that the ones that maybe say things a little different and want to make sure we don't accidentally come off combative? It's a hard balance, I think.
It really is. And so let me do back up. There are some great producers that have really good information on YouTube and other social media. I knew what you meant. Yeah, I knew what you meant. But I don't know. And I actually, if I've got people that are legitimately asking good questions that aren't from a farm background that have an interest, it's awesome to point to those videos and say, well, go watch so-and-so, go watch these 2 or 3 operations, see these videos and get a sense of what they're doing there. I do that if I'm teaching a class or if I'm guest lecturing. I'll have some of those up for the students. Go spend some time on YouTube and watch these 2 or 3 operations. They do a great job. But if you think about what's capturing, there are entities that are really dialed in with popular media, and they've got people that's their job is to go get the stories in front of them and help do that. There are a lot of, you get into Europe, there's a lot of NGOs that are really against modern agriculture, and they've got phenomenal influence politically over there. That was evident from the most recent visit we made over that way. And so, because and I think we do a pretty decent job talking to each other, and I think our farmers do a decent job that way. But I don't know that we do a good job of capturing the emotional component to agriculture. Again, we try to boil stuff down into bushel per acre and pound per acre and dollar per acre or dollar per operation. We're really good at those things. I don't know. I will say those outfits that tend to portray, in my opinion, some distorted views of how agriculture is done. They hit emotion first,
right?
And that's where they start, and then they build their case from there. And so, we can learn something from that there is an emotional aspect to this as well. But
yeah,
I love passing this to Matt because one of my pet peeves, this is unpopular, is thank a farmer. There's a lot of people in your community that are essential, and a farmer is one of them. And I do think we need to thank a farmer. But I really like, and I've learned a lot of this from doing this podcast and being with Matt and Austin and Michael as much as I am, and understanding why are the videos that we make that do get a lot of pub and communities just really enjoy, what makes them different than the other ones, and they don't lead off with thank a farmer. And I think so. I'm gonna pass it to Matt because I think this is remarkable. It's dead on to what you're talking about when it comes to the emotional part. Y'all ask different questions.
Yeah, I mean, it is emotion. I think we speak to a lot of in our videos trying to hit the why the farmer works. I think people I can identify more with the why than the how they go about it sometimes. We all work hard. We all have families. We all have kids we want to succeed. We all have to go to the ball game tonight. We all have to, do all the things. I think we try to really hit home at that because what I find is really hard as someone that's trying to speak to the standard, the regular production agriculture is it's not, the people use the word sexy. It's not interesting as making it bad, It's not controversial necessarily. And it's tough to show it, like when we do just any video on like our young farmers, the room, I think, at our annual meeting really wants to hear the yield and the, that stuff, right? And that we have that balance of understanding that that's actually our number one, that's our audience in that scenario, right? But when it hits online, we understand that them with their kids, them talking about their daily struggles, those kinds of things really do matter. And so when you're trying to speak out to the public, you're right. It's about making it, you only do things based on emotion. You only actually create anything based on a need, an emotional need a lot of times. And those folks that are against agriculture, they only attack that and they make it controversial. They make it clickbait. They make it those things. And it's hard when you're just trying to say, no, this is why we do it. Yeah. It just, it doesn't have that sizzle necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's what's really tough.
And the sizzle. And there's some sensationalism that's just, you're not, it's not our way of approaching things in general. Right. And I'm not saying that that's what we need to do either. Maybe I'll frame it this way. So it's been, 5-6 years ago, I was speaking as a guest lecturer in a class about grain agriculture. It was a class of freshmen. They were taking this general science course and kind of exposing them to food and such and how food systems work. And so my objective going in was, I don't want these kids with the picture of the old dumb hayseed farmer in their mind. I want to talk about technology and I want to talk about their scale and some of those things. So my presentation was on that, and it was showing some of the equipment and showing grain bins and showing yield maps and talking through the different things that way. And a really great question from a student in the back was, well, as a kid that didn't grow up on a farm, how could I ever get into that? Because that is so far, the capital investment, the amount of just infrastructure involved there, how could I ever even dream of getting started in that space? Which led to a good conversation about, well, there's opportunities to work on farms and get into that space. But it also told me I overshot my goal.
Yeah, that's a good perspective.
I was trying to say, farmers are really intelligent, they're sophisticated, there's a lot of technology, but I need to back up and show where it's approachable as well.
Right.
And I will say, and from my opinion on some of the things out there that are somewhat skewed, there is an approachability component to it that they have.
Yeah. Well, look, you're speaking to it. All right, this is how this is done scientifically.
Yeah.
It is harder to process as a person watching the video or whatever, to that thing's going to kill you.
Yes.
That hits a nerve where no, it won't. Watch this 3-minute video to explain why not. And you're just it overwhelms a person to hear where we are in agriculture. And that's a difficulty as a communicator, is all right, I can show that stuff. People things that hit, man, people love equipment, those kind of videos do well because it's just interesting because you can just visually see it and kind of get it.
Yeah.
But it's stuff that you can't get, but you can get that big chemical word that's in my crops now is bad because it's got the whole alphabet in it. It must be bad for me, And I think that's what we try to fight with when we're as communicators is how do I hit a nerve, an emotional nerve, and make people believe in the guy that's talking in the video and that he's just trying to do his best for them. And I think that's what is the challenge as a communicator for sure. Yeah.
It probably takes somebody who maybe doesn't come from a farm background, has a good communication skill set, and is wants to learn about how really good farms manage and operate. It probably takes somebody in that space because they don't have the, they're not predisposed to a thought process or some things that, well, we just know that already. It's not intuitive. Yeah. We probably need some people that aren't intuitive in that space to help us communicate in that space. It'd be my thought on that as well. But again, like I said, this could be a whole just
we could start a whole new
in and of itself. And
I just think that's really interesting to hear it from someone like you that understands how we got here. Yeah. And how do you kind of dig out of that where it's so hard to explain how we got here at this point,
Well,
you know?
And to your point, even if you go into small towns and in towns that they still know who the farmers are and they're a generation removed, they're familiar with the operations. If I give that same basic presentation to them, the comment afterwards, I had no idea. I had no idea that part was going on. I knew they were running big equipment. You know, I knew I had to get off the side of the road when I saw them coming down, but I didn't realize this or that component to it as well. And so that's part of it. You know, you think about as you've sort of alluded to this, and I'll ramble for a moment, and you can shut me up. But you know, if you got kids' toys about a farm, it's got a beautiful red hip roof barn, and it's got every animal you could think of in there. You don't really have a whole lot of plants to mess with. If it does, it's got corn drawn the wrong way, you know, with an ear on the top or something like that. So there's that side of it that you're sort of trying to, you know, it's an old McDonald's farm is what everybody thinks about, and that's very touchable. And if you're doing, if you've got your place set up for kids to come out and play and interact, that's what you want because those are great. We took our kids there when they're little too, so I'm not bemoaning those. It's just we've seen a tremendous amount of sophistication come into agriculture, and while we've gotten more sophisticated, we are part of the reason why there's a disconnect in there, if that makes sense.
Well, speaking on the disconnect, and I want you to do this, and I know you're not going to want to because some of this is some really cool projects that you got to be a part of and quite frankly lead with some of those really remarkable farmers, whether they're still with us or the next generation is taking over. But when it comes to international travel, whether that is bringing a type of crop back to this area of the country, quite frankly, or whether it's what you just did a couple weeks ago when you were gaining some perspectives in a whole different situation, can you give an overview maybe of some of the international travel you've done with some of the groups you've done it with and why that is important or how it has benefited Kentucky Ag? Because I do think that I have friends a lot right now that are in the Kentucky Ag Leadership Program, and that's very much perspective. Let's learn, let's gain perspective. We take farmer groups, and there'll be, you know, reward trips to other countries to see where we, you know, start some of these crops in our South American countries, Central America. But I do want people to understand a lot of our researchers that do continuous trips to another country. It's not just to give a presentation. It's not just to get an attaboy from a colleague over there. There's some things y'all are bringing back. And so I kind of want you to go overview maybe some of the cool places you've gone and some of the benefits that have come from that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I was very, very fortunate. I went down with a group of researchers to Argentina early on to look at soybean production there. In that area, soybean is their main crop that they focus on. They grow a little bit of corn, and we wanted to see, well, why? What's in that system? That led to spending 4 months in Argentina to see about some privatized farmer groups, basically peer groups. They don't have an extension the way we have it here, and they have some other drastic challenges with their government that we don't have, thankfully. Phenomenal natural resources. If they were ever unleashed, their productivity would be every bit as good as Iowa's and parts of Illinois. Their government's holding them back on that right now. And there's some other things. But from that, we were able to took the first farmer group when I was down there for 4 months, brought them in to look at some of that aspect. And so when we've got a young farmer program now through the corn growers that's somewhat has some elements of Kentucky Ag Leadership in it, has some elements of, we used to do a Grain Crops Academy that has some of those components to it as well. It's all about farm transition. You know, the next generation that wants to go into the farm, how do they do that? And so we bring in bankers, we'll bring in other farmers to tell success stories, we'll bring in some farmers to tell some failures as well. It's a really good program, about 2.5 years, and it culminates with an international trip. And so we've done Argentina twice, we've done France once, just did England and Scotland, we've also done Brazil. And these are, as one farmer told me in Argentina, this is not vacation, this is work. And I said, yeah. You want vacation, go on that seed trip, you know, right? That's not what we're about. We're about trying to figure out what's going on. And so Argentina, phenomenal natural resources, a government that just views agriculture as a tax base. And so, and really no safety net to speak of. And so it's forced them to manage their operations and do their operations in very different ways than we do ours. End of the day, they're still growing corn and soybean and some wheat,
Right.
and cattle, but they're doing it in a very different way than we do ours. We got to Brazil, massive acres of land, not near the productivity that we have here or that they have in Argentina, but just massive acres of land. And that creates some differences. We watched them dry grain with wood fires. Every operation, whether it was a farm or a Cargill or a Bunge or ADM, they were all using wood to run their furnaces to dry their
Unreal.
grain.
Wow.
So it's not wood smoke on the grain. It's going through an actual furnace before it and a heat exchanger before it gets into the grain. But very different system than what we deal with here. A government that's further ahead, more favorable toward agriculture, and a government where they're getting a lot of investment from Asia at the moment to build out infrastructure. But where the heart of their main production is about 1,000 miles from a port. And so it's about 1,000-mile trip by land at this point to get it out.
Yikes. Yeah.
There's some strategies to change that, and so we'll see if that transpires. France, heavy subsidies, the largest corn-producing country in the historic European Union. Romania is close to overtaking them if they haven't, and then if Ukraine could ever farm without a rocket in the field, they would
Right.
certainly overtake it. We've actually tried Ukraine twice. Both times we had it on our list. Russia invaded, so we've
So that's not a great look for you
Let's-
guys, Chad. Maybe stop planning that.
we're not anymore. We're not anymore. And so France is just the opposite of those others. Very heavy subsidies and very much a closed loop system. So you buy your seed, you get your fertilizer, you get your agronomic advice, all from the same company you sell back to.
Wow.
And so it's a very closed system, very different operation. This last one was England and Scotland. The only corn being grown in there is for biofuel purposes or to feed dairy cattle. But a lot of the carbon credit issues that companies are pushing for here have been over there for a longer period of time. And there's some government influence on that as well. Now, if you're a farmer over there and you want to collect a subsidy on your crop, you've got to fill out a carbon score sheet. So that's we wanted to see how those farmers were managing that and working with that aspect of it. So yes, we learned about how they grew their crops and raised cattle. We went to the home of Angus in Alford up in Scotland, where the first Aberdeen Angus was actually developed. So we got to see some of those aspects of it. Saw a phenomenal rotational grazing operation with an individual who had Aberdeen Angus, and he also had stabilizer cattle, 2 separate herds that he maintained and managed. Phenomenal operation. And he was farming in and around where they were growing a lot of malt barley for their distilleries up in that region. But all of that was to look at that carbon credit issues, how they interact with those companies over there, how they interact with their government, and what types of those things are headed our direction. So it still was, it was a phenomenal trip. We learned a lot from it. But you're asking, what do we take away from that? What we took away from it is we have a few peer groups in Kentucky now, sort of based off of what we saw in Argentina. And those are doing great. Some of those are farms, some of those are within the Kentucky area. Then that one I mentioned was spanned a larger region, but they're all off that same general concept. We've seen some farmers change some of their management techniques based off what they saw down there, more on their financial management, some of their structure and how they're doing some of that. And so we've seen some farmers adapt to that way. Brazil, it's a little bit harder to see the correlation. That was more of a perspective of they're now the number 1 corn exporter. Where's it all coming from? What's their push? What are they doing? And my initial takeaway is their seed quality is nowhere near as good as ours because it's so much more humid and it's so much hotter that as it's going through its development, they get 70 inches of rain a year in some of the climates that we were in. They're fighting that all the way around. But they have massive volumes. And they're ahead on their carbon story when they go to sell to Europe, ahead of us on that. So that's important. And then you look at France, you see the opposite. You see the heavy subsidy, the enclosed system, and the lack of access to some technologies. because in part of some NGOs and some misinformation that's out there. In an area that could really, really benefit from a couple of those technologies. We saw fields that were nitrogen deficient, and they were putting on way more nitrogen than we do. But the farmers were being told they were doing the right thing for the environment with that system. So, so you see, it helps you understand these various perspectives that you're dealing with. And so I think whether it's with a group like that, whether it's with CALP or it's other groups, there is a mass, and what we've been successful at is having these farmers interact with other farmers. And so we've had a couple of trips we've actually canceled or redirected because it looked like it was going to be more of a political tour or more of a dog and pony show. And so we've shut those down, and we've really tried to stay with farmers. Brazil was a little bit, we had some really good farmers we visited with. We had a few that you could tell were happy that we were there, but they weren't going to tell us anything. And so we didn't quite have as good of a connection that way as we would have liked. But and our farmers did anyhow. If they're traveling around the U.S., they're going out somewhere to get something, they'll stop off and visit farms along the way. That's very valuable. I think that's valuable. I think it's also important just to see what do we really have here and how does our system work relative to other places. And I think there's a lot of value in learning that for an operation. I think it's tremendous value if you're a younger farmer looking at moving into the operation and looking at management and looking at ideas and concepts and getting the sense that we really are in a global world in terms of trade and influences on the crops that we grow, the beef we grow. And so understanding some of those dynamics, I think, helps the operation.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. We laugh about that when we're on beef tour, farm market tour. They go, well, you let us go late at the last stop, but not at this one. And I said, well, the last stop, you were all having one-off conversations with the farmer, his son, his wife, a lot of these people. This stop, no offense, but it was the commissioner of ag or it was the local state rep. And those are vitally important. However, I'm bringing farmers to talk to farmers. And so we're going to have that 20 minutes and we're going to get the quick Q&A. But if I got to cut somebody short, it's going to be that person. It's going to be your lunch stop. We're going to cut that short because I want as much farmer interaction as possible. And a dog and pony show is farmers will feel that faster than anyone. Like it'll take me a minute sometimes to be like, oh, surely they'll switch. Like that guy will turn it on in a second. And a farmer will be like, this is going to be a wasted stop. And what do you know? 10 minutes later, they're right. They can feel it. And so I got to say, I respect it. It's hard to cancel or shift a trip when you start getting that feeling. But you go on one of those, you'll have a guy as soon as you get back on the bus be like, so I could have gotten 4 things done this morning. That was kind of a waste. And you're like, all right, note to self. Never again.
Yeah, that's true.
We will not have that happen again.
So one of the places we visited was right into Scotland. 12 miles into Scotland. You could see the hills in England from the operation. And while we were there visiting, they said, you're just going to stay here for dinner. There's not really any place in the area that's open right now. And you don't think of a place like that being rural, but it was, and they were right. There was no place open for dinner. And so she just sort of fixed whatever she kind of had in the kitchen too. It wasn't like she had a big special meal planned for us, right? It was just kind of a last minute thing. Favorite stop for most of the people that were on the trip was that spot right there because we sat around the table with them. We had dinner with them. We had conversation. Above and beyond what we had with the operation itself, but probably definitely one of the most enjoyable stops. And so people are talking about, well, where's the best place we ate? This, that, and the other. And a lot of folks are like, well, back at that house in Dun, Scotland, right? So, so those type of interactions I think those are critical to develop and work with. And so, is it fun to go on a trip and see something different? Yes, but our goal is to really come away with something specific, a purpose of what you've learned from this, and hopefully some things you can take back to your operation one way or the other.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to round this out with if anyone is interested in maybe some of the things, and this may be for some more of our farmers, but I know you guys have newsletters that come out pretty regularly. There's events that are happening. So put a plug in. I guess this comes out kind of mid-September is where we're at. So what's coming up that people need to have plugged we can put in the show notes?
Sure. So once a month, we publish the Kentucky Field Crops newsletter. Colette's in charge of that. And
it's a great newsletter.
Just had one come out.
My biggest fan.
There
She's
you go.
Great.
And so we try to give timely updates in that in terms of what's going on. Obviously, we're right at we're we're right into harvest of corn. We'll start and into soybean, and you're looking at planting wheat and other winter crops as well. And so that's what those articles are about this particular month here. We have a winter wheat meeting. It'll be down in Western Kentucky in February. We'll have field days in in May at Princeton for wheat. We'll have one in July for the corn, soy, tobacco field day. Those are the big ones. There's some pest management workshops coming up that by the time they will not have run yet by the time this gets posted.
Okay.
So those are available online as well to look into. And then we start into our winter meeting season where a lot of county offices will have meetings as well. And so those will get going in earnest at that point.
And then there's a big celebration happening in Princeton in October, correct?
It is, yes. A 100-year celebration happening in Princeton. There are going to be some festivities on October 16, and then there'll be some other activities going on around that as well. But a lot of excitement about that. It's a phenomenal story. You're well aware of it, obviously, with your background, but the property at Princeton was bought by farmers in that area. Was donated to the university so that the university could do some research out in their area and work with them. And then over time, they eventually got faculty out there, got a building in place and put faculty out. There's 13, 14 people now that are university faculty, that are our counterparts, that are doing work in that area. And that's where a lot of the no-till, a lot of double crop soybean, winter wheat work was done over the years. Some of the work on grass tetany was done there as well. Some of the very first beef studies in terms of specialized studies looking at mineral uptake and mineral use, those were done at that site. So a tremendous amount of applied research is going on there over time. Back we had the last ribbon cutting, actually the first groundbreaking that we did. We had a farmer from Bath County drive all the way over to the groundbreaking ceremony.
Unreal.
And we had farmers all over the state come in for that. And usually these field days that we do at Princeton, you get 5 or 6 states that show up to it, which is quite impressive as well. So yeah, that's coming up as well. Pretty excited about that. I'm trying to think of any other big main events. The CATS training will start. I think it starts in January. I think their first training is a drone license workshop, so you can go through the process and learn what you need about to operate a drone legally, and it culminates with taking a test to get your certification to fly drones in the state. And I think it starts with that. Then they start to have those throughout the season based on what's going on in the fields at that time.
And a lot of these dates that are coming up are normally at the end of that newsletter. So if you sign on to that newsletter, you go on the website and look at that, and you're like, oh, he mentioned something, but it's not there. There's a good chance that date might be set, but the facility's not done, or we don't have an agenda yet. So you'll see those monthly kind of coming on the back end of that, and they're very exciting. I know I'm biased. I grew up in Princeton. My joke is I trick-or-treated with people that I called by Mr. and Mrs. in their first name, and then I went to UK and found out these people were some of the pioneers of no-till research or grass tetany, and I learned that they were Dr. something and not just Mr. and Miss. And so that's just a family down there, and so I'm very biased on how great that research is, and growing up in a town like that with those kind of people there. So if you are around, I will not be here. I have to go on a work trip with my husband that week, but I am so excited for everybody else to be there. But there are so many good things we're doing from a university perspective, and we were glad to have you here just to talk your background, but then also so much extension work and different things. So it's neat to have you. So I appreciate you being here.
Well, I appreciate it as well. Hopefully I'll see y'all again.
Yes, please come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks, Chad, and thank you, listeners. And we will see you next time on Let's Get Rural.